Sunday nights were always the hardest. The apartment would fall quiet after sunset, and the walls seemed to close in, heavy with memories I'd tried to forget. I would sit at the edge of my bed, staring at the floor, still feeling the ghost of her hand in mine. Even now, I could see her in my mind, the way she kept walking toward the window that night, her back to me, her silence louder than anything she could have said. But before that night, before the betrayal, there was only hope. We hadn't spoken in years when she suddenly reappeared in my life. It was a mutual friend's engagement party, and I had gone reluctantly, dressed in a too-tight blazer and clutching a bottle of wine I knew nobody wanted. The place was packed, laughter spilling out of every corner. That's when I saw her, across the room, standing under a string of fairy lights, her smile as effortless as I remembered. My breath caught. She wore a pale blue dress that clung just enough to make my heart ache. Her hair, longer now, fell over her shoulders in soft waves. For a moment I wondered if I was imagining her, but then her eyes met mine, and everything stopped. She froze too, just for a second, before looking away. But that fleeting glance was enough to remind me of everything we'd been and everything we'd lost. Later that evening, after a few drinks and nervous pacing, I finally approached her. She stood alone near the balcony, arms folded against the chill. "Hi," I managed, my voice low, almost apologetic. She turned, and for a split second, she smiled. "Hi," she said softly, as though she'd been expecting me. We talked that night as though no time had passed. About work, about the city, about people we both used to know. She told me she'd moved back a few months ago after years away. I didn't ask why, afraid of the answer, but she volunteered nothing. Still, her laugh was the same, and so was the way she tucked her hair behind her ear when she got shy. When the party wound down, I offered her a ride home. She hesitated at first, then nodded. On the way, rain started to fall, and she leaned her forehead against the window, tracing little shapes in the fog. At her door, she looked at me for a long moment before whispering, "It's good to see you again." That night, lying awake, I couldn't shake the feeling that fate had given me another chance, and that this time, I wouldn't let her slip away. What I didn't know was that she was already halfway gone. The weeks that followed blurred into a quiet rhythm of late-night calls and stolen moments. We slipped into something that felt familiar yet fragile, like an old song I still knew the words to but sang more carefully now. Every time she smiled at me, it chipped away at the walls I'd built around my heart. Every time she touched my hand, I convinced myself she was choosing me all over again. One Friday night, after dinner at a little Italian place near her apartment, the air between us shifted. She wore black that evening, a simple dress that clung to her like a secret, and she barely touched her wine, though her fingers kept playing with the stem of the glass. We talked, laughed, but under the table, her knee brushed mine again and again. The rain had started again as we left the restaurant. I offered her my jacket, but she refused, stepping into the drizzle as though daring the world to stop her. The car ride back was quiet, yet electric, her perfume filling the space between us, her hand resting on her lap, fingers twitching as if holding something back. When we reached my building, I hesitated at the door, unsure what to say. But she simply looked up at me, her eyes dark and unreadable, and murmured, "Let's go inside." In the dim light of my bedroom, she didn't sit or speak. She just kept walking, past the bed, toward the window, and stood there with her back to me. Rain streaked the glass, and the city beyond shimmered in gold and gray. I stayed by the door, watching her. Her shoulders seemed smaller than I remembered, her arms folded tight around herself. "You okay?" I asked softly. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she lifted her hand to the window and traced a single line in the condensation. Then, in a voice just above a whisper, she said, "You don't know what you're asking for." Her words unsettled me, but before I could speak, she turned around. There was a strange, desperate glint in her eyes, a mix of longing and sorrow I couldn't untangle. She stepped closer, closing the distance between us, and kissed me. Everything after that felt inevitable. I kissed her back, pulling her close, feeling the warmth of her breath against my cheek. Slowly, gently, I laid her back on the bed, my fingers brushing through her hair as though memorizing every strand. For that one night, nothing else existed. Not her hesitation, not the shadow in her gaze. But even as she clung to me, I couldn't shake the faint, haunting thought. She was already somewhere else. Morning came quietly. A pale gray light filtered through the blinds, washing the room in a muted glow. I reached for her instinctively, half asleep, expecting to feel the warmth of her skin beneath my hand. But the sheets on her side were cold. I sat up, confused. Her dress was gone from the chair where she'd draped it the night before, and the faint scent of her perfume lingered like a fading memory. On the nightstand lay nothing but silence. I checked my phone, no message. No missed call. At first, I told myself it was nothing. Maybe she just had an early morning. Maybe she'd text me later. But as hours turned into days, the weight in my chest grew heavier. Every message I sent was met with silence. Every call went straight to voicemail. By the third day, I couldn't take it anymore. I drove to her apartment building, hands gripping the wheel so tight my knuckles went white. I waited across the street, rehearsing what I would say when I saw her. My heart pounded at every figure that emerged from the lobby, but none of them were her. Until finally the door opened, and there she was. But she wasn't alone. A man stood at her side, tall, impeccably dressed, his arm draped casually over her shoulders. She laughed at something he said, her head tilting toward him the way it used to tilt toward me. And then, as if to drive the knife deeper, she leaned up and kissed him. My stomach dropped. I wanted to believe it was some misunderstanding, some cruel coincidence. But when she glanced around and saw me standing there, her eyes widened, and for the briefest moment, guilt flashed across her face before she looked away. That evening, I called her one last time. This time, she answered. Her voice was quiet, almost brittle. I never meant to hurt you, she began. Then what was it? I demanded, my voice breaking. She sighed, and the sound carried more sadness than I expected. I'm engaged, she admitted. I have been for months. He gives me everything I'm supposed to want. But you make me feel alive. I just needed to feel that one more time. The words hung in the air like ash, and I realized she wasn't crying. But I was. That night, alone in my room, I lay on the bed where we'd been just days before. Her absence was everywhere, in the creases of the sheets, in the quiet of the dark. And for the first time, I understood. She had kept walking all along, walking toward someone else. The weeks after that night passed in a haze. My apartment felt colder somehow, as though her absence had seeped into the walls themselves. Every corner of the room reminded me of her. The window where she'd stood, the sheets still faintly scented with her perfume, the quiet hum of the ceiling fan spinning above the bed where I'd once laid her gently down. For days, I replayed everything she'd said. I just needed to feel alive. You don't know what you're asking for. She was right. I didn't know. I had believed that love, or what I thought was love, could rewrite the choices she'd already made. But she was never really mine to keep. Some nights, I would sit by that same window, staring out at the rain. I wondered if she thought of me when she lay beside him. I wondered if he knew how she looked at me in the dark, or how she whispered my name as though it still meant something. But wondering didn't change the truth. She had chosen her path, and I wasn't on it. Slowly, I began to take back the parts of myself I'd given away. I boxed up the little reminders of her, the scarf she'd left behind, the empty wine glass from that night, and tucked them deep in the back of my closet. I started running again in the mornings, filling my lungs with air that didn't taste like regret. Friends I hadn't seen in months invited me out, and though I didn't always smile, I went. I let the noise of their laughter drown out the silence she'd left behind. And little by little, I began to forgive her. Not because she asked me to, she never did, but because I couldn't carry her betrayal any longer. Forgiveness wasn't about her. It was about me. One evening, months later, I stood at that same window again. The city stretched out below me, alive with lights and the quiet murmur of people moving on with their lives. I pressed my palm to the glass and thought of her, the way she kept walking that night, the way she never really stopped. I realized then that I had kept walking too. Not back to her, not toward the memory of what we'd been, but forward, toward something I hadn't yet found. I smiled, faint but certain, as the rain began to fall again. Because love, I'd learned, doesn't always mean holding on. Sometimes love is knowing when to let go. And that night, standing there alone, I finally did.